Okay, family's asleep and I've got some pollen to do. You probably saw me making a moss pole there at the start of the video. I'll sort of save you the long and the short of it, but yeah, today we're going to be polling up some Philodendron sodoroi. I'm gonna have a look at my sharoniae, and just double check that it's doing well on its pole, and then we will also extend my Philodendron Splendid moss pole as well. Let's get into it. So to begin with, I'll give you a look at my sodoroi, and the story here is that I went to Bunnings one day and found that they had got in a really cool order of all these philodendrons, Brantianums, sodoroi, they had some others as well. And I ended up grabbing the Brantianums and sodoroi. You've probably seen the brandies in the propagation video that I did with the aeroponics unit. I'll link that above. But effectively with the sodoroi, I checked all of them, all the ones they had, and I pretty much got in there just as they'd arrived and found one pot that had probably 10 plants in it, or at least, you know, like 10 different shoots. And so I'll give you a look at it because I ended up taking it home and splitting it up and then growing each of them out. So I've got them all in here. I've actually just watered them, so yeah, by the way. Anyway, so there's probably about, how many have I got? 1, 2, 3, 4. I got 5 pots worth, and each one might have 2 or so sort of growing points coming out of it. So I'm gonna bring them out, but there was a good reason for doing this, and I'll give you a look when I bring them out. Okay, so there's actually only 4 pots, I just noticed. There are 2 here that are just single vines. I'll put them to the side. There's this one here that I think is at least 3. Yeah, 3, and you'll see, I do not know what this monstrosity in here is doing. He's not having a good time of it. So there's 3 there, so that's 5. And then I have this beast, which is 1, 2, 3, 4. At least 4. And again, it has another one of these ones that seems to be doing loop-de-loops. So the reason that I potted them all up into separate pots originally was, one, I didn't want this thick bush at the bottom of a moss pole that had like 10 heads on it, right, growing up it. I also thought maybe I'll sell some of them and sort of recoup the costs, which, you know, I might do still. And then the other thing that I noticed pretty quickly was that these have a tendency to just grow weird leaves and do that inchworming thing when new leaves come out. Like a really good example is probably that there. They seem to do this all the time. There's another example here. That leaf is just not having a good time of coming out. And then you would have seen, I think in here and here, those loop-de-loop ones that are all messed up. So I think what's happening here is that, as you'll know, there's kind of like a sheath that goes at the base of the leaf, out of which the new leaf forms. And I think the reason that things inchworm is when the integrity of the sheath is weak at the base, and that growth point can kind of bend and then push its way vertically out of the bottom of the sheath where it's folding over, as opposed to being forced all the way out the tip. So it should look like this, right? When it's actually being forced all the way out the tip of the sheath over here. But if down here, lower down on the sheath, it's weaker and the plant can push its way through, that's when you end up with like, the initial tip was coming out here, and then the integrity of the sheath around it was obviously too weak, and you get this kind of like elbow pushing out instead, and yeah, quite often you get deformed leaves. Anyway, so I noticed after a while, I was sort of watching these guys, that I had 2 good growth points that were pushing out some really nice looking leaves. So this leaf came out, and then I was keeping an eye on this leaf at the back. You can see it's coming out really nicely as well. And it was the same deal for this one. It pushed out this leaf that looked really nice, and it's obviously still doing well there. So yeah, I was glad that I did that, and I was just keeping an eye on it for a month or 2, trying to work out which specimens that I wanted out a lot to be able to put on a moss pole to have grow up that pole nicely, because if they were gonna keep doing this weird inchworming thing and having these deformed leaves, they were gonna look like crap on a moss pole. So yeah, I've decided to take these 2 and chuck them on the moss pole, and I'll probably end up either chopping and propping the rest of the plants and just leaving these 2 growth points to go up. But For the beginning, I might just leave everything on there and just see what it does. But yeah, the sodoroi leaves tend to size up pretty quickly, so I think 2 will be more than enough on a single pole. It may even be too much. You guys let me know if you've got experience with sodorois on a pole. And I'm just reusing an old pot here. I'm not too phased about it. If you're really anal about it, you could probably clean the pot out really thoroughly, or just use a very new pot. But I kind of like recycling stuff instead of always buying brand new things to use. Although that's not really an excuse for not disinfecting and cleaning it. That's just laziness. Don't lie, Pete. All right, so I've cut out some gauze here, some fly wire, some insect mesh, whatever you want to call it. It's like Glad wrap, it's got names that are different all over the place. And I am folding that up and chucking it in the bottom here to catch some of the large particulate in my soil mix, because these holes are rather large and I don't enjoy having stuff fall everywhere. So it looks like that in the bottom there. This stuff's pretty cheap. You can get it for like $6 a meter at local nurseries, or probably not nurseries, but you know, warehouses, Bunnings, that sort of thing. I've got my pole here. So you would have seen me make that at the start. The moss has already been hydrated. One end of it has about 10 centimeters of space where I will put soil and then put that end down into the bucket. So I might move these guys out of the way. Out you go. Bring my soil into view here. This is just my sort of ultra chunky mix. I've got like really large pieces of pumice in here. I've got orchid bark in here as well. There's a little bit of soil, some worm castings, and some large chunky perlite as well, not the fine stuff. So I'm gonna put the tip of the moss pole over the top and just try and chuck some of this chunky stuff into the base here. You're probably gonna have a lot of it fall through the cracks, but it's all good. You'll eventually get enough of the chunky stuff in there that it's sort of filled up. Okay. The reason for doing this is so that the roots can sort of grow into it, but also when you chuck it into the bottom of the pot, that's got substrate in it that may not fit through the gaps in the mesh. If you were to chuck your moss pole in there before putting soil in, the soil is going to try and get in there through the mesh holes, but it may not fit, and you may end up with this huge pocket of air down there, or the moss, you know, might hold on to way too much moisture down there as well. Okay, so I'm just going to fill in a bit of the soil here at the bottom. It's probably about 5 or 6 centimeters, 2 inches or so. Usually the pole will stand on its own at this point. Ta-da! And then the next thing is I'm going to try and find my nice sodorois. Take out the little labels here, and I will unpot them. I don't know whether or not to leave this here in the middle. Maybe I will. So I'm going to unpot these guys, and I'll just have another look again to make sure that they aren't easily separable plants, because yeah, if they are easy to separate, then I'll probably just take the large ones. See that the roots are sort of fine and nice small roots, sort of like the Brantianum. I wonder if these guys are closely related. They do look very similar, especially when they're in their sort of juvenile states, the young forms. All right, so I might not fiddle with this too much. I'll just break it up a little bit. But yeah, it looked like it was probably getting close to time for a repot. Now I'm going to find the back of the plant. So where are the leaves facing, and where can you see aerial roots kind of coming out? These, like the Brantianum, seem to have aerial roots that kind of come around the whole vine. So it's probably not the end of the world if you do it the wrong way, but yeah, if you can do it the right way, do it the right way. So I'm going to turn the moss pole around here carefully, hopefully without tipping it over. And what I'm doing is I am putting the edge where the wire mesh is coming into contact with itself, and I've zip tied it at the back away from where I want the plants, so the plants aren't growing over the top of that, because they can end up ripping and, you know, coming in contact with the jagged edges of the mesh. Okay, so the first plant isn't going to fit properly, so I might have to open this up a little bit more. But I'm going to gently wedge in here, and I might sink it down a little way, seeing as the bottom of the plant here doesn't have many leaves at the very base. Right, so I'm just going to leave that one there for now. Pull the second one out. I've got a skewer in here too that must have been propping it up at some point. Okay, now I'm Just gonna loosen the soil here, gently pull that out. It's the same sort of deal. Roots are looking really good here around the bottom, so it's probably ready for a repot anyway. They're pretty thick actually at the base here. Like, there's actually quite a lot of them all coming out. All right, so yeah, again, I think all these plants are actually attached to one another. They're not sort of easily coming apart, which is probably why I left them together in the first place. So I'm just going to gently push this moss pole. I might have to actually just try and squish this a little, or it's not gonna fit. It's not gonna wedge between very well, the moss pole and the rest of the pot. So I'm gonna try and lean this moss pole in slightly, and then gently wedge this guy in. Perfect. All right, down you go. Sweet. Okay, now I'm just gonna wash my hands because they are covered in wet soil. And what I'm gonna do before I start adding in more soil and finish it off is just make sure that I've placed the main vines that I want to grow up the pole well and in contact with the wet moss, so that the roots hopefully dig into the moss and attach themselves, and then eventually I won't need this sort of stuff, the horticultural tape here. I think it's called, oh man, I'm having a total brain fart. I can't actually remember, but you can get this at Bunnings for about 10 bucks a roll. It's good stuff, and you can kind of link it together if you cut really small pieces, or, you know, wrap it around itself multiple times if you cut many pieces that are too long. Okay, so I want this one growing up here. So I want this main large leaf up against the pole here, and on this side I want this main one up against the pole. So I'm just going to start by getting the soft side of the Velcro against the plant. So tuck it in there. Again, situating it upright. Usually it's best to try and get this over the top of the most recent node so that that node has its new fresh roots in contact with the moss. I'm going to apply just a little bit of pressure, not too much, and then just Velcro the thing together. And there you go. So that's sort of it to begin with. The plant is now attached to the pole. I have seen other people attach the plant to the pole prior to putting it into the pot, but this is just the sort of way that I like doing it. It's what I found to be easiest for me, at least. Now what I'm going to do is fill in around the plant, and I could probably use this mix, but it's a bit dense. The soil that I used for it was a bit smaller and less chunky, and I kind of want the water to not hang around the roots too much. I want the pole to be the area that's moist, that moss in the pole that maintains most of that moisture, so that I don't really have to worry too much about overwatering the moss pole or the plant, because any excess will just go straight through this really chunky soil mix at the bottom. So that's why you want to avoid using really heavy or heavier soil mixes in your pots here. You want the soil to be able to just get rid of all the moisture possible, because really you're going to be probably overwatering this thing otherwise, because you've got to keep watering it frequently to keep the moss wet. So yeah. Hopefully that makes sense. Probably didn't explain myself very well. Basically, you want ultra chunky mix at the bottom here, and you'll water it for a little while at the base whilst the plant's still establishing itself, but once it's joined onto the moss pole, you just water the moss pole. You don't have to worry about watering the bottom here. The water will just go down with gravity, and it will go into the soil at the bottom anyway. Okay, so there we go. There are some extra, obviously some extra growth points coming off the side here. If you were really worried about it, you could kind of connect them up to the pole, but I think ultimately I only want those two large plants, well, parts of the plants, two large vines going up the pole, and I'm probably going to just chop and prop the rest of it off at a future time. So yeah. Okay. Well, there we go. That's part one. I'll go probably water in the soil. In fact, I don't need to water in the soil. I've already watered it, so I won't do that. I'll just let it sit, and I will probably water the moss pole next time, or the soil in maybe 3 or 4 days, depending on how long it takes to dry out. So there you go. Okay, so next I've got my Philodendron Sharoniae here. This new leaf is coming out, which looks great. I put this on a pole the other day, but I hadn't connected the plant to the pole, so I'm just going to try and do that today, where you will see that it's kind of just sitting here. But I'm going to try and just make sure it has contact with the moss, and also that the aerial roots that I can see here, you can probably see them coming off this most recent node, are wedged into the moss as well. So I'm just going to kind of create a little bit of a cavity and then push these roots into the moss so that hopefully that encourages them to dig in and allow the plant to grow. In fact, an easier way I've found to do this initially, if you're sort of lazy and you don't want to break the roots or you're worried you will, is just to get a little bit of moss and kind of air layer that node, right? So you could put some moss here behind it, just a little bit, kind of keep it in contact with it, a little bit in front as well, over these roots at the front here, and that may help guide it towards growing into the moss pole. And the other thing is that when you do this, because you now have moss in contact with the moss pole, when you water the moss pole, the water will just seep into the moss here as well and, you know, hydrate it. So that's probably the easiest way of doing it. Okay, it's looking good though. Hoping that it grows quickly up this pole and these leaves keep sizing up because they are stunning. All right, that's that one done. Wasn't much to do. Okay. Last but not least is my Splendid. I gave you guys a bit of a look in my September favorites video, and I think since then this new leaf has come out, which is about the size of my head, so I'm so happy it's doing so well. I'm actually really impressed at how easy this guy has been. He has just been growing a leaf probably every 3 weeks, you know, so just going off tap. But yeah, because it's getting so tall here, I was kind of waiting off, not wanting to extend it because we're about to move house in like another 2 weeks. But I've just noticed that the aerial roots are starting to push out from that node, and I don't want to sort of miss the chance of having that adhere to the moss pole. So yeah, I'm just gonna extend it. And I haven't done this before. This is the first time. The Splendid is my first extension. So this should be fun. So what I've got here is a 180 centimeter, what do you call it, like a plastic stake. And I'm going to try to wedge it in behind this moss pole without having to pull it out of its, man, I'm having a slow day today, pulling it out of its pot. So I'm gonna try and just sort of wedge it down, all the way down. You may find this a bit difficult. I think that's done the trick, and it is in there. And then I'm going to zip tie it to the back of the moss pole here, just so that it has something to hold it on. Just do one for the moment. The next step is to put a little bit of moss into the top part of the pole here and make sure there is enough at the bottom here of this one. I'm going to try and line up the zip locks. Actually, no, I'm not, because the zip locks on this pole are at the front. I want these ones at the back. So I'm going to try and just put this over the top of the other moss pole like so. I might attach it to the pole first so that while I'm zip locking the two poles together, it doesn't fall on my head. All right. Sort of need multiple hands for this. Well, more than two. All right, hold on. Oh, don't fall. Okay, maybe I'll start with the top. So I'm just using my finger to thread the ziplock through the wire and then back out. It's sort of, this is the finicky part, which can be a bit of a pain in the butt sometimes. You can also use like a small implement to do this. It makes it easier, but I find that I can usually do it with my fingers. And I'll do one more for good luck. Okay, there we go. Now, I'm just gonna cut these zip ties, zip locks. And after I've done that, the trick will be to thread them back in. So you try and get that sharp bit of the plastic facing back into the pole so that it won't damage the plant. There we go. Now, lastly, I'm just going to make sure that there are a few more zip locks holding the pole to the moss pole, the stake to the moss pole, and then I'll give them a trim and we'll be all set. Okay, so it's probably hard for you guys to see. I'll see if I can roll up this mat, get it out of view, and then let you see. So I've got the stake on the back of the pole here, and I can probably just lift the pole up now. So the stakes on the back here, I've used zip locks or zip ties to connect the moss pole to the stake, and I've also used 4 of them to connect the 2 poles together. The only last thing to do is to make sure that vine going up has the node facing the moss pole. So I'm just gonna cut this in half. I only need about half of this. There we go. Look for where the aerial roots are coming out. Try and get them in contact with the pole, soft side touching the plant so that you don't scratch it. And then just wrap it around like so firmly. And yeah, the rest should take care of itself. So that's all there really was for this video, guys. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. If you've got any questions about moss poles, feel free to leave them in the comments below and I will chat to you there. And in the meantime, YouTube reckons you're going to enjoy this video. I hope you do, and I will see you there. Tooroo.